Hello, my name is Alan Wang, and I will be talking about my work on social group split and merge prediction with 3D convolutional networks. Our work is inspired by the concept of social groups. When we navigate in a crowded environment, we unconsciously process pedestrians with similar movements into groups. This perceptual process is also known as Gestalt. As shown by these two images, we do not have the mental capacity to process the movement of every single individual. Instead, we group pedestrians with similar moving patterns into a single unit and predict the movement of the group. In this particular work, we focus on the group dynamics of splits and merges. Being able to predict social group splits and merges can also offer benefits for robot navigation. In the case of splits, if the robot is unable to see the opening gap, it may first try to go around this group of 4 pedestrians. Once the gap opens up, the robot suddenly realizes the existence of a shorter path and decides to go for the gap. If the robot is able to successfully predict the split, it can ready itself beforehand and proceed towards the gap when it opens up. Similar situations can also happen with merges. If the robot is unable to predict merges, it may first try to pass through the gap, only to realize shortly after that the gap doesn't exist anymore. If the robot can predict group merges, it can avoid diminishing gaps preemptively. On most mobile robot platforms, researchers mount RGBD cameras or laser scanners on them. In many occasions, the sensor readings can be quite noisy and it is difficult to localize them. Some pedestrians may even be partially or completely occluded. Our work focuses on observing the social group shapes. For the first part of our work, we generate social group shapes from the given pedestrian information. For the second part of our work, we compile these binary social group shape images into an image sequence, and by observing how this social group shape evolves, we apply our model to predict splits and merges. The first part of our work, the social group shape generation pipeline, offers flexibility that can account for noisy sensor readings or occluded pedestrians as shown on the previous slide. Before I talk about the details of our method, it is important to draw a distinction between our task and similar tasks studied by the research community. The first type of tasks is action recognition, more specifically, group action recognition. Current work on group action recognition focuses on recognizing a single action from the entire scene. In our case, not all the pedestrians in a particular scene are involved in a specific group split or merge event, and multiple group split or merge events can occur at the same time. The second type of task is pedestrian trajectory prediction. In this task, the positions of all the pedestrians are assumed to be known, whereas in our case, we can work with noisy laser scans or even occluded pedestrians. The third type of task that has some common elements with our task is crowd tracking. Sometimes, researchers use group splits and merges to enhance tracking accuracy. However, in tracking tasks, pedestrian information during and after the group split or merge events is available. In contrast, our task is a prediction task, and only information prior to the split or merge events is available. Before we can use our model to predict social group splits and merges, we need to generate social group shapes first. Given some pedestrian information, in this case pedestrian positions, velocities, and orientation as shown by the circles and lines, we can apply a grouping method to assign social group memberships to the pedestrians. In our case, we use the clustering method called DV-scan to perform grouping. Next, for each individual, we define a personal space. In our work, we use the asymmetric Gaussian personal space model defined by Kirby. Finally, we apply this personal space model to each individual and obtain the convex hull of all personal spaces belonging to the same group. This resulting convex hull is the social group shape. Note that for this social group shape generation pipeline, we allow flexibility for different grouping methods to be used. This will only result in different group memberships for each pedestrian. We can also apply our pipeline on laser scan points. Due to the lack of laser scan datasets on crowds, we performed a simulated laser scan by placing an imaginary robot as represented by the blue circle. Now instead of pedestrians, each laser scan point becomes the basic element to be grouped, and the convex hull is then directly applied to all the laser scan points within the group. Note that without defining personal space models for the laser scan points, we have come up with different social group shapes. Also note that in this example, we can still form a social group shape even if the pedestrian at the bottom right is occluded from the robot. Now that we have our social group shapes, we can use our model to make predictions. Note that given the sequence of social group shape transformations, if we stack our social group shapes one after another, we can obtain something called volumetric features. To predict splits and merges is essentially to predict whether a tree branch will occur given the volumetric features of the inputs. This inspired us to use 3D convolution networks to tackle this problem. Our architecture is a slightly modified C3D architecture with the final fully connected and output layers being adapted to our domain. In our case, we predict both whether a split or merge will occur and where it will occur. Note that the location of a group split and merge prediction is very subjective. Therefore, it is meaningless to pursue extreme accuracy in that regard. To evaluate the effectiveness of our model, we designed a comparison against the state-of-the-art trajectory prediction models. As a common setting in these works, we performed a cross-validation on the combined dataset of ETH and UCY. And the preparation pipeline for the trajectory prediction datasets is as follows. Given an initial set of pedestrians, we run the trajectory prediction models to obtain the pedestrians' predicted future states. Then, we apply our grouping method on both the initial pedestrian states and the predicted future pedestrian states to obtain the respective grouping outcomes. Finally, we compare these two sets of grouping outcomes to determine whether the trajectory prediction models predict a group split, a merge, or nothing happens. As shown by this table, when making predictions one frame ahead, our work outperforms the baseline social LSTM model and the state-of-the-art social GAN and SR-LSTM models. When making predictions 0.5 seconds ahead, our work still outperforms the baseline social LSTM model and the state-of-the-art social GAN and SR-LSTM models. Note that social group split and merge events are rare occurrences. If we make predictions 1 second ahead, we will only have 229 splits and 153 merges across both the ETH and the UCY datasets. Recall that we also generated social group shapes using simulated laser scans. With these social group shapes generated from noisier inputs with possible occlusions, we observe an acceptable performance drop. Note that although direct comparisons are somewhat meaningless, these numbers are still higher than the outcomes of the state-of-the-art trajectory prediction models. Also recall that our group shape generation pipeline allows for different grouping methods. This will only result in different group membership assignments. As shown by this table, we change the parameters used in our grouping method, which result in different grouping assignments. We make predictions using the models trained on the default parameters, and we observe good performance transfer across different grouping parameters. The performance with the default grouping parameters is shown here. Last but not least, by observing the features learned by our model, we obtained some interesting findings. We learned that our 3D convolution network is indeed able to capture the subtle temporal features in the social group shape transformations. For example, in the upper left demonstration, our network is able to capture the extending group shape boundary line to successfully predict a split. Please refer to our paper for detailed analysis, along with other evaluations. In conclusion, we presented a novel formulation of the split merge prediction problem, which included example pipelines to generate social group shapes. Furthermore, we demonstrated the effectiveness of 3D convolutions in this task and the ability to capture temporal features. Although prior work has shown that 3D convolutions is effective in action recognitions, this only sufficiently shows that 3D convolutions are effective in capturing spatial features. However, in those works, even a single image can imply the action performed in the image sequences. In our work, it is impossible to tell whether a split or merge will occur from a single binary social group shape image. Therefore, we have in some sense provided additional evidence that 3D convolutions do capture the temporal features in image sequences. Thank you for listening to our presentation. We are happy to take any questions via email.